Hey everyone, we're here with Courtney Gras, and she is the author of the Student Startup Guide. Super excited, super pumped to talk with her from the perspective of startup founders. If you are a student, we're talking about everyone's a student of life, everyone's a lifelong learner, but if you happen to be in college, and I'm going to be reaching out to you for those of you who are in our Founder Accelerator community. And we're going to be talking about this book. And I just want to introduce everyone to Courtney. This is going to be a really interesting perspective because I don't get to talk a lot to founders who are students currently, in the sense of, hey, how are you doing? What's it like to be in college and trying to have a startup at the same time? So this conversation is really going to cover really what that lifestyle is all about. Whereas I would normally be talking to you about, okay, what exactly is your startup and all the mechanics of how to get things going. This should be a fascinating conversation. And I've read the book. I can't recommend it enough. And it's just a privilege, pleasure, honor to have Courtney with us as the author of the book. Courtney, thank you very much for joining us.
Ed, thank you so much for having me. It's such a pleasure to be here. I love talking student entrepreneurship. This is my favorite subject, so I can't wait to dive in.
Okay, so then let's dive in. So I got my copy right here, and it was a great read. It was a fast read. I was able to read it in one sitting, which tells me everything's organized and it's a good book. So I want to congratulate you on this. How about we start off? Who are you and what brought you to this point where you'd take on an endeavor like this?
Right. Yeah. First of all, I'm not an author by trade, right? So the story of how I came to write a book is pretty bizarre. I started my career as an electrical engineer. I was studying engineering in college. Let me tell you, first and foremost, I had no interest in entrepreneurship earlier in my life, wasn't really exposed to it. My parents weren't involved in business or in entrepreneurship. And so it's something that wasn't even on my radar. It's something that I didn't even plan for. But when I was in college, I was really involved in extracurricular projects. I got to admit, I wasn't much of an academic. I think I'm allowed to say that even to a student audience, but I love getting my hands dirty. And it turned out that one of the projects I was working on, we ended up patenting, right? And the university came to me, and one of my professors, close advisors, said, hey, this patent could be a product. And I had never thought about that before, right? Because I'm an engineer. I'm like, okay, I'm going to go graduate, work at NASA. I'm not even thinking about starting a company. I also have no idea how to start a company. And my professor said, well, there's a pitch competition happening on campus in a couple of weeks, literally a couple of weeks. And the deadline to apply was like the next day. And I said, you know what? Fine. I'm going to do it. I'm going to figure it out. And this is going back to like 2009, right? And the campus that I went to didn't really have an entrepreneurship center for students. I know that's changed a lot. Nowadays, universities have great programs for students, which is phenomenal. And I talk about that a lot in the book. But at the time, I didn't really have anything. So I was just Google searching, like, what is a pitch deck? The very basics. And went to this pitch competition. It was horrible, right? For me. And when I look back at that pitch deck going in, not having any idea, the pitch deck had equations and circuit diagrams and, but that was a starting point. And I tell that part of the story because I think it's so important for students that are just getting started, that it's okay if you don't understand everything about entrepreneurship, right? You could learn. There are people that are here, they're willing to help you, right? And what I learned at that event, some people came up to me after, I did not win, came in third place actually, which is pretty impressive given the fact that I had no experience. But some people, local entrepreneurs, came up to me after and said, you know what? Your pitch needs work, but we'd love to work with you on this. And so that was the spark, right? That started an 8-year journey for me working on my startup. This was my sophomore year of college. So I worked on my startup part-time when I was taking all kinds of other classes. I ended up doing some stuff like I slowed down in my coursework, so I had more time to work on my startup, and we could go into that and all those details later. You worked on my startup when I was co-oping at NASA, and then after I graduated, I was still working on my startup, but we hadn't raised enough money for me to go in full time. So I had to do the startup part-time while I was working a full-time job as an engineer. And I hit this point where I was like, you know what? As much as I thought going into my career, hey, I want to be an engineer and do this for the rest of my life, what I realized in my startup experience is I love startups. I love that lifestyle. I want to do this for my career, right? Instead of engineering. And I also uncovered in my startup that I was more of a people person. I wasn't really loving engineering. And so I uncovered these unique qualities just about myself. And I think what I'm meant to do day to day in my work. And I said, I want to do that instead. So this crazy thing. And I quit my job at NASA and I said, I'm going to go do my startup. I found a part-time job as an engineering manager, worked on the startup for 8 years. And, I'm based in Northeast Ohio, and I struggled a lot personally. Again, like I said, university didn't have a ton of resources for student founders at the time. Northeast Ohio didn't have a lot of resources for entrepreneurs. I didn't know where to go to find other founders to talk about this crazy experience I was going to. I didn't know where to go to find mentorship. So we struggled a lot. And at the end of the day, the startup ended up failing, right? And I think there's a lot of reasons for that. And hindsight's 2020, you could say, oh gosh, I could have did this and that differently. But a big part of that was the fact that I was disconnected from a community. And so I wanted to work on that. And I started a founder community here with some other local founders. And we said, volunteer basis, we said, let's just start something for founders. Let's get founders together. Started small with happy hours and founder dinners. And I fell in love with that work. And I ended up making that a full-time job, first in Ohio. And then I got connected to Techstars. And for those of you who don't know, Techstars is a global accelerator program and venture firm. They invest in early stage companies all over the world, but they've also done a lot of work in startup community building. So I was really attracted to Techstars and just how they put founders first. And I knew I wanted to work there. So I ended up finding a job, the perfect job for me. It was a job leading their student entrepreneurship network, right? What could be better? And so in that work, this is where the connection to the book comes in. I ended up working with hundreds of student founders from dozens of college campuses all across the country. Colleges big and small, right? There was like UCLA and NYU. Then there's, University of Buffalo, right? All this diversity in geography and in focus and size of the university. The students from everywhere. And I was working with students one-on-one in programming, and I met some incredible student founders. I mean, students that were accomplishing things I couldn't even imagine accomplishing in college. And I was transitioning out of that job. I spent just about 3 years doing that, met so many amazing founders. And I thought, even though I'm moving on in my career, still supporting founders, I wanted to do something to capture their stories. And I was looking online and I said, okay, there's a ton of books on entrepreneurship, obviously. There's even some other books about how to start a company in college. It exists. There's, books, the 12 steps to become a student founder. I don't know. But the thing that was always kind of falling flat for me and the other students I worked with is that, it's just one person's perspective, right? And it's not going to be the same for everybody. And I thought I had this great opportunity to share stories from student founders from everywhere. So that's what I did. I talked to, over 50 student founders when I was initially putting the book together. I found just about 30 to raise their hand and say, yeah, I'm willing to tell my story. I'm willing to tell you how I started my company, what I struggled with, and what were the big takeaways in my experience. And so I collected all those into this book, as you said, try to keep it really easy to read, short, like really concrete takeaways in each and every single chapter. It talks about everything from mentoring to fundraising to really important topics like feeling imposter syndrome and ageism and sexism and entrepreneurship, which I think were so important to bring up in the book. Put it all together, and here it is. We just officially launched a couple weeks ago, so I'm so excited to see what the book can do, and just to get it out in the world.
Fabulous. I have the pleasure of advising one of your authors here in the book, and I can definitely say it's just amazing to see kids in college. You are like an accidental founder. I didn't get into startups till I was much further along in my career. It's amazing to see students now say, I actually will go into startups right out of college and start dreaming and envisioning that versus, back when I'm going to school saying, just go get a job, get something steady, etc. Taking that leap right out of college, it's a great time to do it. And I'm sure you've experienced that and you've seen that in many students that you worked with. For you, how has that changed? Like, how has the landscape changed as far as students and their dreams and visions of becoming a founder at the college level?
Yeah, I mean, I think today it's so much more celebrated and even embraced at the university level than it was before. And I think what's changing that is the job industry, right? Large corporations, Google's a great example of that, right? Don't necessarily need a college degree to go work at Google anymore. Companies are looking for different types of skill sets. They're looking for entrepreneur mindset. They're looking for team building and empathy and all these different skill sets that you could really only gain if you're working in a startup, right? You're going to have such a leg up over other applicants if you have that startup experience, right? Innovation mindset, all these different new things. And I believe it's the changing of the professional job environment, and universities are noticing that too. They say, oh my goodness, universities want to see their students being placed in jobs, obviously. So now universities are innovating. They said, how can we support our students in entrepreneurship? How can we make this a natural just complement to their career journey? And how can we help to develop skill sets outside the classroom? So we're seeing universities embrace it, and that means students have a lot more resources now. They're seeing universities encouraging this kind of activity. They're seeing their startup experience being an advantage when they graduate. I tell students all the time, even if you start a company in college and it doesn't become your long-term gig, you don't become the next Facebook or whatever, that's okay. Like entrepreneurship can become, and your startup can become such an important part of your career that I think it's a huge advantage to get started in college. And again, a decade ago, even, I don't think that was the case necessarily.
100% agreed. So then, okay, so let's talk and let's dive into some particular details. But first, so here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to pitch the reason students who are watching this, the students in our community, the students I advise, should read this book. Okay. So, and then I'm going to have you kind of append and add to my pitch. I'm going to say to the student out there that you may be sitting going, I'm just a student. But the fact of the matter is I've got 60-year-old founders who feel like they're going right back to college because they don't know how to do a startup. Nobody knows how to do a startup when they first start. Information is really tough to get out there. You kind of see the glitzy stories. If you're a student, it's just really great to read and empathize with other stories from other students. This gets in the nitty-gritty. You're not alone. There are thousands and thousands of student founders out there in college doing this, and it's all distilled in this book. And if just to know that you're connected to a bigger, wider startup community around the United States, North America, the rest of the world, this is happening, pick up this book just to prime you, get you pumped up for this journey. And you'll also get some really great nuggets. Some of the tips, we'll explore that a little further, but it's just nice to ground yourself and say, hey, I'm not alone. There are other people like me. How'd I do? What would you add to why students should read this book?
I love it. First of all, Ed, great job. I think the overarching theme and why I wrote the book was exactly that. I wanted students to feel like they could do it, and anybody could do it from any university, from any background, right? Anybody can start a company in college. That's the overarching theme. I think the only other thing that I'd add to that, one of my personal motivations in putting together the book, is that I wanted a one-stop shop, like a one-stop resource guide for everything related to student entrepreneurship, because information is everywhere. And it's tough as a student founder to figure out, okay, here's kind of how I raise funding if I go to this website, but then this website tells me this about the perfect pitch deck, and there's probably 80,000 different versions of the perfect pitch deck. So I wanted to put really great vetted resources in the book as well. So in addition to the student founders that wrote stories, I also pulled in subject matter experts that I've met through my career. A lot of them were from the Techstars network. So we have Nicole Glaros, that's kind of, the OG when it comes to pitch coaching. She coaches all the founders in the Techstars network. So you get her advice on how to really perfect your pitch. We have the Techstars pipeline manager talking about how do you apply to an accelerator program. So I also wanted to pull in these really great vetted resources so the students didn't have to keep searching everywhere for information. It's all in the book in addition to the stories. And then in addition to the book, speaking of resources, we put together a student founder resource guide on the website that's just open and freely available to anybody. And I just encourage students to go check that out. I asked the students that contributed to this book to give me their top resources. Like, who do you follow on Twitter? What podcasts are you listening to? What student pitch competitions do you participate in? So all that's in one place, which is really neat. And I just wanted to make it easy and approachable for students to go out and to do this. So you're just dead on, Ed, but that's the only thing I would add.
And you just brought something else up. What I would say, if for a student who did read the book, you should go to your college professor who's running the class and say, this book needs to be on the syllabus. Full disclosure, I have an ed tech platform and we're doing higher education. I'm always looking for which books, which resources to read. And you brought up a really great point. A student will read something and say, well, I'm so removed. Like there's no real connection to the person who's giving the advice in the book. It seems unattainable, inspiring, possibly great advice, expertise, but to get this as a primer and say, I'm getting reading from other students as well, just makes that connection. And I think this should be on every entrepreneur, whatever class, if you're doing innovation on entrepreneurship, things like that, should be on the syllabus for the course. What do you think?
I totally agree. And I think that's my main goal. I thought, gosh, you're right. In college, it would have been great if somebody would have handed me this book. I would love for it to be on all entrepreneurship course syllabuses. Again, so students can pick it up, they could read a copy. I think that's a great idea. That's the best way to spread the word. Would love any students that are listening to go back to your college professors and say, hey, this book is out there. This is really great. I think other students could benefit from it too. I know that's my personal goal with it is I just want all the students to have access, right? As many students as possible so they could be inspired and motivated to go out and start a company and feel more comfortable about it too.
Right on. Let's talk about a question just kind of popped into my mind. As you were doing this, what surprised you the most about student founders as you were learning from them and interacting with them? What stood out and went, wow, I didn't expect that when it comes to students and being founders of startups?
Goodness, you know what? I think the biggest thing is that some of the students I interacted with are the most mature professionals that I have come in contact with in my career. And also I graduated in 2013. So it's been a career. I've interacted with a lot of folks, but not only are they incredibly hardworking, but they follow through, they answer emails, they're hardworking, they're engaged in the programming that I worked with them in, and just incredible, outstanding, mature professionals. And I think there is something to say about the character. And, again, you think, oh my goodness, I came into Techstars running programs for students. And I think there's this assumption that, they're going to be earlier on, you're going to need to hold their hand more, they're going to need more coaching. But I would say quite to the contrary. Sometimes the students in my programs were out there working harder, hustling harder than the other entrepreneurs that were, in the accelerator programs, I'd argue. I think there's so much drive and so much energy that students have that completely blew me away and it's completely changed my perspective. I said, goodness, if I had the opportunity to invest in a company, I'd love to invest in a student founder.
I agree. I find students, what they lack maybe in life experience, they make up for in creativity, imagination, optimism, just this confidence to go out and tackle some of these challenges. They don't have the same cost of opportunity, which is the reason I encourage right out of college to go into it, stay in your mom's basement and do your thing. But they challenge me. And I think for me, that's the reason I love interacting with student founders, because they keep me fresh. And they challenge me and they're just dreaming. I remember meeting some kids out of MIT down in Silicon Valley, and they were, they asked me, they said, what are you working on? And I was down there, pitching my SaaS platform. And it was like old stodgy employee engagement management type stuff. And then I said, what are you working on? They were like, oh, we're going to scan this and we have this AI and all this technology. And I just said, wow, this is a young man's sport, a young person's sport, but they just continually inspire me. And I'm sure you experience the same.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's something about, once you go and you have a career and you go big corporate or what have you, you could kind of develop this pessimism. You're right. And almost, you're not as innovative, you're not as creative anymore. So I think there's something about being in that position where students are like, you know what, let's go out and try it. And I think that's core to entrepreneurship, is they're just willing to go out and do it. Right. I think there's a lot of hesitation that develops later in your career for good reason, right? You go out, you get a family, you have a lot more responsibilities. You can't just go and try something. But students are in such a unique position being, where they could go off and they could change their mind and they could do something else in another year. I think that's really unique and special.
Absolutely. Totally. Let's give the students a bit of a preview of what they're going to get in the book. And then, let's just say for students who might not read the book, okay, I'm going to accept that. Maybe they're just going to watch the video, where we do live in a YouTube generation, what have you. So I'm going to pepper out some of these topics that I found interesting, that I also see student founders, really every founder, struggle with. And you tell me what insights you gained from the book and different things. And let's dole out some snippets that will have value for everyone. How's that?
I love it. Sounds great.
So cash flow, just staying alive, making ends meet. You're a student, you're probably on a student loan, you're eating ramen noodles every day. How do student founders cope or deal with or address cash?
Yeah, I think, I'll pull out from some of the stories and even just my personal experience. I think alluded to this very briefly a few minutes ago, but that whole concept that when you're a student, you could still live with your parents, right? You could have these creative ways you can't do after you graduate to save money. You can go off and work that co-op or that internship part-time while also working on your startup, which is something that I did. So I still had cash flow coming in to kind of support myself, albeit it was very part-time and very minimal, but I was living from home. I was working a co-op. I was working on the startup company. So those are some, creative hacks, if you will, to help yourself just in the day-to-day. And then, as far as actually fundraising goes, of course, there are a ton of student pitch competitions nowadays. There's one of the co-authors in the book, I believe she won, oh my gosh, 20 or 40, I don't even remember at the top of my head, pitch competitions, right? She go out and hustle and you can make some decent cash, and it's all non-dilutive funding, right? So like grants. So I've seen students go out and raise, $250,000 in non-dilutive funding, and that's amazing, right? And the other thing is, if you're on campus, talent, growing your team, right? You've had this huge advantage in that you could use other students to help you develop your product for free. You could find students that, and I did this actually, went to my university and said, I don't have money to pay a marketing firm. I need a brand. I need a logo. I'm an engineer. I don't know how to do this stuff. Marketing Capstone Project came in and helped my startup company. They developed our entire brand, all that for free. And the neat thing is they even made it a competition. So we got different options to choose from in the class. The students were all competing against each other, and I got to pick, which brand we like the best. So many ways, everything from talent to, where you live and who cooks your dinners, to those student pitch competitions. There are a lot of great ways to solve that cash flow problem when you're in college.
Let's jump on that and talk about the resources available to students. There's a distinct advantage because it's an ecosystem unto itself. So if you're a student and you're saying, I want to get in this startup game, provide a few steps. What are the first few steps that students should do to access the resources at their college?
Yeah, right. I mean, first and foremost, I think it depends if you're in an entrepreneurship class or not. That professor is probably going to be connected to an entrepreneurship center if it exists. And this does vary from university to university where it's housed. It might be in the College of Business, but it might not be. I think it just kind of comes to going off and talking to your academic advisor. If it's not obvious, you can't find it on your university website. I think by and large, if you put in a little search box, entrepreneurship in your university website, something will pop up if you have some kind of an entrepreneurship club or an entrepreneurship center. Whatever it is, connect with them first, that extracurricular group, even just outside of classes, engage with them, have a meeting. I know when I was working with the Launchpad Network through Techstars, there's always there's a staff member that runs that entrepreneurship center, and they intake students that are interested in entrepreneurship. They sit down with you and kind of learn, hey, what are you interested in doing? Where are you at in your process and your idea? A lot of times they have a physical space on campus, which is great, especially now that we're all going back, and actually being on campus in person. So you could go and physically walk by the entrepreneurship center. In fact, a few students that contributed to my book actually found their entrepreneurship centers by just walking by them, like in a library, and they thought, oh, what's that? And then 10 years later, they have this huge startup company because they walked into an entrepreneurship office one day. So it's as easy as that. Just, taking that first step to do the research on your campus, find whatever entrepreneurship center might exist, connect with somebody there, and then they're going to hook you up with all the resources, whether it's classes, events, pitch competitions, mentorship, networking with other student founders. That's just the first step that you need to take.
I want to encourage students. Individuals in these resource centers are paid to talk to you. It's not like if you're a founder and you go knocking on the VC door and they don't, you're one of 100 people who've contacted them that day. They are there to help you. They're not going to say no to that conversation. It's just you, the student, who needs to, take the initiative and say, I'm going to have this conversation, and the door is not locked. It's not tricky to get through. It's all there right at your fingertips.
Absolutely. Yes. They are there to help you 100%. You don't have to be worried about anybody stealing your idea. I think this is a big thing that I hear from students that are new to entrepreneurship. They think, well, if I tell somebody about my idea, they're going to steal it. And let me tell you, we hear that a lot, have heard that a lot over the years in entrepreneurship programs. Let me tell you, if you're going to be the founder of this idea, it takes a lot of work to start a company. Mm-hmm. And, you're going to put in the time, you're going to put in the effort. Nobody else is going to want to waste their time doing that. This is your baby. So don't be afraid to ask for help. And certainly your university is the safest space to go to talk about your idea and to get that help, because you're right. That's what they're there for.
Great advice. Let's address the elephant in the room. in the sense that we hear a lot of stories of founders that quit school. And you actually, the book actually addresses this. And I found it an interesting take. And you're not, I found that your take wasn't pro university, you must stay in university. This wasn't an ad for, university enrollment. So what about that? Like how do you see and how do you address that? Do I even need university? Should I drop out? Let's talk about that.
That's right. My good friend Matt wrote this section, and he was a student founder that did decide to drop out of college. And I'll give you, of course, my perspective is in the chapter. I say, look, this is very situational. It's going to depend on the person. It's going to depend on where you're at in your startup journey. But in Matt's case, he had just raised a lot of money, out from the West Coast, and so his startup hit a point where it wasn't sustainable. He put in the effort. He went and he worked with his university and his advisors first, and he said, is there a way that I could graduate and make this work, given the amount of workload I'm going to have to put into my startup, given all this funding that we just received? You're going to have big milestones coming down. You've got the venture capitalists breathing down your neck. It's going to be tricky to juggle both. And so Matt hit this point where he realized that he couldn't sustain both. And he made that decision to drop out of college to go pursue a startup. But there was a lot that went into that decision. It was, okay, they had raised the funding that they needed. He could go and support himself financially and go and do this work. And they see a clear path forward, so people always say that, entrepreneurs are big risk takers, right? I think that we're just really effective, calculated risk takers, right? So of course there's a risk associated with dropping out of college, but for Matt, he did the math, right? He's okay, got the funding, all arrows are pointing this way. He didn't just say on a whim, oh, you know what, I got a startup idea, I guess that means I had to drop out of college. Not the case. And I wouldn't encourage that. So I think if you're at that point where you feel very comfortable that you have a sustainable career path moving forward, and again, if the funding's there and the market opportunity is there, then you could jump on it. But it's very situational. For others, like for me, I didn't do that. I didn't get the big multi-million-dollar check from the venture capitalist. So I knew it wasn't a good idea for me to drop out of college in my personal case. So I said, I stayed the course and I ended up graduating. And again, I was creative with that, where I did slow down my graduation. It took me 6 years to graduate. It's a while, but I loved it. It was worth it because I got to work on my startup company. So you could kind of do that hybrid approach if that suits you more. But I'm glad I got my degree. I think I learned a lot in engineering that I could apply to my career now. I won't go into too many details around that, but for me in my personal case, I think it was a good decision to stay in college. But again, it's going to come down to, you got to sit down on paper and calculate the risk.
It's a great response. My parents would love hearing that from you because I did drop out of college. Just to be a little more transparent, and this leads to my next question, just for the student founders out there who, that I engage with, or if I'm going to be talking to you, I also started a startup in college, and I did explore. It got to the point where I had teachers applying to come work for me. And so we were kind of, we were on this nice trajectory, and I did explore with the school. I went to the dean and we tried to work something out. Some teachers were great because I just couldn't make it to class. They would allow me to submit my product as part of their assignment, the different things to finish the course, etc. But in the end, it just wasn't a tenable solution. I ended up dropping out, and then my startup got acquired. But quite frankly, and I'm just, to be transparent, kind of going down memory lane and thinking about and reflecting upon my life, I actually wish I didn't drop out. Somehow I would have made it work. Plenty of other opportunities. I do regret dropping out of school because some of the experiences and then the different things of just being able to say, I finished my degree and what have you. I do reflect upon that. So it's interesting that we're giving all sides and we're kind of doing a balanced perspective about this. But let's talk about the success story. So from your experience, what's the most successful? We don't have to get into names or details, anything that you want to share. What is the most successful story that you've seen come out of a college or school founder?
Oh my goodness. Well, I've seen a lot. I I have two that just stick out in my mind, and they're both really similar. But again, that student that I had mentioned, my story earlier, who had just kind of walked by the Launchpad campus, the Entrepreneurship Center on their college campus. That student's running a very successful company now. I think they've raised upwards of $20 million.
Wow.
And yeah. And they went through Techstars. They were on Shark Tank. It got funded on Shark Tank.
No way. Great.
Yeah, really cool story. Yeah. And I've known this founder for, a number of years. And I just thought, well, what an amazing story. And you think of, again, the students in the early stage where the student was sitting in their dorm room and had an idea, and then that entrepreneurship center on their campus was the catalyst, right? I think in a lot of ways you need that catalyst to kind of say, okay, I'm sitting here with an idea, now what, right? I could sit online and research and apply for pitch competitions, but the student got in and got the mentorship help, got the coaching that they needed to go out and be successful, started on their campus, and then went on from there. It's amazing, and I think the other big thing that I noticed with the success stories of student entrepreneurs is that network piece, right? I think that the student was able to get connected eventually to the Techstars network, which is huge. If you could get into a big accelerator program, or even, a student focused accelerator program, something on a national level where you could start to expand your network beyond your university, that's when your things are really going to start to tick, right? And so the success stories that I've seen are the students that started to go national, hit national student pitch competitions, get out there, get into a national accelerator program. That's when your network explodes. And, the more people you can interact with, the more you're going to have opportunities presented to you. So that's kind of the common thread that I've seen in successful student founders.
Okay. So then let's go to the next tier. What some of the stories, one in particular that I really appreciated reading in the book was a student who did a startup and saw it through. The startup still exists, but she ended up parlaying that into a real swanky job at one of the big tech companies, right?
Yeah.
FANG, or actually the Mang now that Facebook is Meta, but just talked about how, and you'd mentioned this earlier, how the whole startup experience while in school was great as that stepping stone, if you will, and that's okay. We're not saying that you have to be that $20 million funded and start building that unicorn and ride that rocket ship. Maybe it just gets you a real good job in tech. So that's one story that I really appreciated. So my next question is, what are some other stories that you've experienced from founders where maybe their startup didn't go well? Maybe it ended up not making it, not getting funded, or had to shut down while they're in school. What transpired after that, and what experiences have you seen?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, actually, a number of students that wrote stories for the book have since moved on, like you said, and got some really cool tech jobs. I've seen a few of them went off to work at startups that they connected with kind of in their local startup ecosystem, right? So and we see this a lot, if you're out and you're going to the startup networking events, you're going to the pitch events, you're inevitably going to meet other founders. You're going to start networking with other founders. That's why there's a chapter in there about the importance of startup community, because I think, even if you're not thinking about it when you're there, you're focused on your own startup, goodness, you're starting to make connections for your future. And so, hey, you know what, the day that your startup says, okay, this isn't it, we're closing the doors, but you could still connect with other founders. And we saw a few of these student entrepreneurs go and get jobs with other startup companies. And of course, that's an easy hire. It's in their comfort zone. They've had that experience. The startup says, oh yeah, you founded your own company. You know how this works. So you could find a lot of success getting employed at other startup companies. So that's one approach. Or again, like I mentioned, the larger, more forward-thinking companies. We have one of the students that went off to go work for Meta. There's all these incredible jobs, the Googles of the world, at AWS, and all these others that really do value startup experience. And so, to the students, I would just say, make sure you're leveraging that. Put it on your resume. You could articulate, use those as years of experience, right? You're chief operations officer for your startup, put it on your resume, right? Those are incredible skills that you're not going to get anywhere else, that level of experience, team leadership experience when you're still in college. That's like amazing, being able to manage projects and manage people. That's really unique. And so, yeah, I think using your startup as a springboard into another career, and it could be, for a tech company in your field, you could be like me and go really crazy and go and work for an accelerator program, right? Which is a really fun job, I will say. Go out and help other founders. I mean, there are almost endless career paths for a student founder.
You say put COO or put CEO on your resume. A lot of students, they experience what you called imposter syndrome. They say, am I really going to put that I was the CEO of my own startup on my resume when I'm applying for that job at that big tech company, what have you? What have you seen? How have students dealt with that imposter syndrome at that stage?
Yeah. Yeah, gosh, I was in Twitter spaces, but I'm not big into Twitter spaces, but I was having a conversation with student founders from all across the globe, right? The number one question that kept coming up was about imposter syndrome, right? And feeling that, you're young, everybody's looking down at you, they don't trust you and your experience. So this is just kind of related to that idea of being hesitant to put something on your resume. And the answer, and this is addressed in the book a little bit, and a lot of the students that wrote about this said it sounds really simple, but it's true. But you just have to be confident, right? Like,
Mhm.
you've done the research, you've done the customer discovery work, you put in the time, you've spent, if you went down and just spreadsheet it out, if you have to think, how many hours have I spent project managing? How many hours have I spent managing people? You'll see it on paper, it'll make it more real to you and say, wow, like I actually have a good amount of experience doing this. And, and then you get better at it over time. And I think that also getting really good at your personal pitch, right? It's not your startup pitch, but just like your story and telling your journey, right? So, you're in a job interview, maybe your startup failed. Somebody asks you, why did you start this company? Tell me about that experience. Practice that, practice just going through in your head, why did I start this company? What did I do? And own it. If you're the CEO, own it, just because it is what it is. You were the CEO, right? So, what, this is what I did. And like, it might sound a little uncomfortable. You might be very uncomfortable doing it, but honestly, with practice, you're going to get better at it. Practice with your friends, just like you would a normal startup pitch. That's what I had to do too, because again, it could be very uncomfortable. But what'll change, you'll start to get more comfortable in those situations when you're in a room of venture capitalists, if you walk in with confidence, right? And that's what I've heard time and time again from students that have overcome imposter syndrome. They say, you know what? You just have to shut your eyes and just say, I'm just going to be confident and try it. And you'll get more comfortable over time doing it again and again and again. So yeah, not, the most articulate rocket science kind of answer, but that's what I've heard from students all over the globe.
It's all
Be
about
confident.
confidence.
Yeah,
The same thing with founders who are not in school. you
exactly.
you had the benefit of being a technical founder. You could build something. What about those founders, kids in school right now? They got an idea, but they're not technical. They're not in computer science, not in engineering. What would you suggest to them?
Oh, I mean, if they're not a technical founder, I'd say go to your College of Engineering, go to the College of Computer Science, and meet professors maybe first to get connected to students that are working on projects, right? And of course, I have a technical background, so I understand, like, I just logistically how this works. But for, say you're a marketing major and you have an idea for a startup, go to your College of Engineering and say, what, are there student competitions, student project teams, student senior design projects, right? Those definitely exist. And a lot of universities are even starting to pair and matchmake business students to engineering students or computer science students to work on projects and to work on entrepreneurship. I know a couple universities that I worked with directly that are doing this, which I think is amazing. So again, that could also be something that the Entrepreneurship Center could help to facilitate and help make introductions for you. But that student technical talent on your campus, again, most likely free help. You're going to find somebody that knows how to build. I think this has gotten so much easier over the years, also just because of the internet. You can meet people online and meetup groups. There's a whole other conversation that we could have about making sure that, you're networking online and getting connected. There's co-founder dating sites now, where you can find co-founders online. So many more resources nowadays. But of course, if I was a student founder, I would start on campus to see if I could find other students that are working at my university to help.
Okay. This is a bit of a sensitive one. I'm curious your perspective. We are always encouraging our founders to try and build something and validate their ideas before they start trying to raise money, what have you. A lot of founders, and I don't know whether this happens in colleges, but quite a few founders sort of get in their heads, I'm going to get money to build my idea. I can just put it on a napkin. I'll go to a VC or an angel and poof, they'll write a check and I can get going. How important, even in college, is it to build something to get to that level where you can start to enter pitch competitions and what have you? Is it the same as what we advise older founders? What's it like at the college level?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say time and time again, this has been consistent, regardless if I work with student founders or if I see, just professionals, adults, mid-career that are coming in and starting a company. Everybody struggles with that validation, right? Validating need, market research, going out, making sure that there's actually a need for your product. I messed this up with my startup. I had a technical product. As I kind of told my story, we started with a patent that turned into a product, and we did zero customer discovery work. And we're like, oh, everybody will want this, right? Because we were engineers and we didn't do customer discovery. And that was to our detriment, right? We ended up wasting a lot of time and had to pivot years later because we didn't do the research up front and we didn't validate the idea up front. So I would say just as important for students, as any other professional or any other individual who's later in their career that's trying to start a company. That's what investors want to see. They want to see validation. They want to see traction more than anything. And they want to see your personal dedication to the company. I could say, seeing the Techstars Accelerator application process and how we review applicants. They're very straightforward about, we want to see traction and we want to understand, why are you the right person to bring this company into life, right? Why are you the right one to be running this company? So I would say definitely focus on that. And your university should have resources to help guide you with the customer discovery and validation process, right? Before you start going out raising a bunch of money to build something, make sure that there's a need for it to be built first. And I know it's hard to do. We all want to skip to the fun part, but you learn so much in customer discovery that it's something you just can't skip.
Okay, the principles, the techniques, the methodologies are the same, so which is really great to hear. What about self-care? Let's talk about the pressure of grades and parents and loans, and you're young and you're at that age where you're still figuring out your identity. It's a pressure cooker. And so you add on top of that a startup. Wow, I can imagine how exponentially sort of the heat in the kitchen goes up. What do you recommend for students in taking care of themselves?
Yeah, absolutely. We have two students touched on this in the book, Alyssa and Ben, and kind of shared their stories. I think that, you'll read a lot nowadays about entrepreneurs struggling with mental health. And I think that it's amplified at the student level because, as you mentioned, it's not even just startup, it's also startup and family and classes and grades, right? And, social life, and also being young. And as you mentioned, kind of trying to figure out your own identity. And there's a lot of pressure associated with that. And it's going to vary depending on your personal situation. But I think that, without getting into too many tactics, again, that connection with other student founders can sometimes be the most important thing. And trusted mentors and advisors. I think having that sounding board, it's almost like finding a therapist, right? It's very, that's something I didn't have. And what I desperately wanted when I was a student founder was just to be able to talk to somebody else about what I was going through. So being able to join a community of other student founders and talk to them about it. Another thing with the book on the website where we have a sign up form right now, we want to launch a student founder community, which hasn't been launched yet, but I know just so that students can build connection and, just kind of have a group therapy session, right? And talk about what you're going through, and make sure that you're still taking care of yourself, which sounds a little crazy, or simple, if you will, but just making sure your life is balanced. I've seen some student founders that throw themselves 100% into their company. It's like company and school, and that's it. I just caution you and say, make sure you're still making time for social life, for your family, for me time, just alone time to read, time to do things to unwind. It's so important. And you might think, oh my gosh, how do you ever have time for that as a student founder? Like I said, in my example, I took a step back with coursework. I couldn't do it all. So there are creative ways that you can make time in your life for yourself. And I would just encourage students to really think about balance, right? And that it is possible to have me time and free time and social time and work on your startup and work on school, but you have to be really great at time management, lots of resources for that, and just taking a lot of time to reflect too and seeing how you're feeling about things. So I think that's it. It's the time management piece, making time for yourself, and also having those therapy sessions with other founders and trusted mentors that will help get you through that. But yeah, I can't emphasize how important it is.
That's what really impressed me about the book, is just how human you made things, acknowledging that people go through stuff, students go through stuff. It's not just technical ABC 1, 2, 3, go do it. It's no, you have a life, right? And it's important to approach it holistically. I got two more questions, and then let's talk about how students can connect with you. Sure. My first question, and I'll ask them both. My first question is, what's a pitfall? If you could warn students of like something that's going to completely sabotage like self-sabotage, or they're just gonna walk into a booby trap, what are some common, or what's the main pitfall that you see that students should watch out for? First one. And then second, if students are watching this outside of, I'm going to go read the book, I'm going to go get the book, I'm going to contact Ed, and by the way, I'm giving out free copies for students who want it. What's the first thing that you would advise them to do actionable right after watching something like this? So first question, pitfall. Second question, what's the first action?
Love it. Okay. So biggest pitfall that I've seen with student entrepreneurs is getting caught up in the romanticized idea of entrepreneurship, which in many ways you can get caught up in the student, I mentioned student pitch competitions is a very positive thing, but in some ways they're like these big flashy events that you could waste a lot of time on. And they don't turn into anything. And I've seen lots of students spend too many hours, and there's a balance, right? Because of course you want free money, right? That's great. But some students that just go from one pitch competition to the next, and they're actually not working on their company. They're not working on validating their product. And we almost fell into that as well with my startup. There was a lot of time that we spent working on grants and the flashy pitch competitions, and just kind of got caught up in like, oh, I'm on the Forbes list, that means we're successful. No, you're really not. You're not successful until, your product's out in the market, right? And somebody's buying it. So I would just, as much as, it's hard to say because that is a really great thing. I'm happy that pitch competitions and all those support systems exist. Just be cautious and consider the fact that you still have to work really hard on your company. As great as you are at pitching, make sure that you're still building your product. So there's that. And then the action that I would take, I would say go, if you're not already connected to your university entrepreneurship program, go and connect with them, right? Go and connect with somebody else and tell them that, hey, I want to get involved in this. I want to start a company. Go out to your university, find that person. I would go and start Google searching on a university website and see who the contact is and get involved, or sign up for an event, find a meetup that's happening on your campus with entrepreneurship. It's all about taking action, right? Taking that first step to connect to the right people that could help move your company forward.
What about if you go and look for resources, and let's say you're just in a real small town and maybe you're going to a community college or another program? What if there isn't something there? What would you recommend?
Yeah, definitely connecting to an online community, right? Like hopefully, the community with this book, I would say that's one, but I don't want to just talk about that because there are, of course, national organizations that do support student entrepreneurship. So just starting to do research and connecting to online communities. Sometimes they could be regional too. There could be great Slack workspaces or Discord. I don't understand too much about Discord, but I'm in a lot of great Slack workspaces. There's a Cleveland Tech Slack workspace, very active, 5,000 members, right? Lots of great people in tech and startups and entrepreneurship. So find a regional group to be part of if you don't necessarily have that on your campus. And then, there's like YC Startup School, Techstars has their Entrepreneurs Toolkit. There are lots of great resources that are just readily available online that you could do from wherever you're at, right? And so it doesn't necessarily mean just because, your university doesn't have the most evolved and advanced entrepreneurship program doesn't mean that there aren't resources out there for you. So, and then check out the resource guide too, right? I think on the website that could help point you in the right direction. Or if you connect to a student founder online, ask them what they're using. That's a great way to get connected.
Fantastic. How can students get connected to you? What's the best way? You're very accessible. I know you're open to talk to anybody, but what's the best way to contact you?
Yeah, I'd say first connect with me on LinkedIn and send a message. I would be more than happy to connect with you there. You could also contact me through the website. And I know you're going to put that, in the notes, but it's students-start.com. So there's a contact form that goes straight to my personal email. I will read it. I promise I will respond. And again, if you sign up for the community as well, I'll have your contact information. Would love to connect with you on Slack one day. But certainly LinkedIn and the book website. You could also follow me on Twitter, at Courtney Gras. And I'd love to connect with you. Any and all platforms. I'm always connected, for better, for worse. Absolutely.
I'll put all that information and make sure everybody has access to it. What's next for you? What's your vision? Where do you want to take this?
Yeah, I'm so excited to get the book out into the world, right? We just launched. So again, my goal is to get the book on as many college campuses as possible and to build a community to connect these student founders. That's my real vision. My passion would be to build that vibrant community, have them connecting and sharing information. I don't see this book as being a one-off. I think it has to evolve over time. I'd love to continue to evolve it, keep telling student founder stories, and just see more student founders finding success in their own way, whether that is for them.
Well, I certainly appreciate what you're doing. The next generation of founders, they're going to put us all to shame. And I'm totally looking forward to it. I think the future is in good hands. What last words would you have for anybody who's watching this?
Gosh, well, I just say, first, congratulations on being here, right? And listening to our conversation. I think that's the first step in doing anything, right? You've already taken action. I know you're completely capable of doing absolutely anything. So again, whether it is starting a company or you figure out, hey, you know what, I'm going to do something else with my career, just kudos for being here today and keep pushing, keep trying, keep taking action. Yeah.
Courtney, it's been a pleasure. I want to congratulate you on the launch of your book. We look forward to collaborating with you here at startups.com in some way and just demonstrating for the world we're all connected. It's going to take a village. We're all in one ecosystem. It's not about one tribe versus the other tribe. It's just if we believe in students and we believe in startups, we want to work together. So thank you so much for spending this time. This was great.
Thanks so much for having me. I hope everybody has a great weekend or whatever day you're watching the sun. It was such a pleasure.